In the 41st millennium, there are no constants. Reality bends, breaks, and rebuilds itself according to the will of unseen gods. Faith shapes matter, emotion fuels storms, and death is not an end, but a transformation. Yet even in this realm of madness, something alien arrived. Something that did not belong to either the material or immaterial worlds. The warp screamed before he appeared. Across the Eye of Terror, demon worlds convulsed, rivers of raw emotion turned to glass, and the skies boiled with colorless flame. Every astropath, every navigator, every chaos sorcerer felt it. A presence descending not through the warp, but into it. And then, like a black star erupting into existence, Thanos of Titan emerged. He fell through reality without sound. His armor, reforged in energies unknown to mortal science, shimmered between form and formlessness. The infinity gauntlet was gone, burned away by the paradox of this dimension. But his eyes glowed with something older and colder than any chaos god, will unshaken by infinity itself. He landed upon the surface of a demon world, a continent of flesh and screaming oceans. The impact sent waves of unreality spiraling outward. Demons fled. For the first time in eons, fear spread among creatures born from fear. Thanos rose, observing the landscape around him, a theater of constant flux, where mountains bled and skies whispered prayers to entropy. He did not recoil. He did not rage. He studied. The warp was not chaos to him, it was potential. In his old universe, he had sought balance through death. Here, balance required mastery of life's purest opposite, emotion uncontained. He understood instantly that this was not a place to conquer by force, but to command by understanding. He extended a hand, fingers curling as though seizing an invisible stone. The air around him convulsed, solidifying for a heartbeat into geometric order, and then dissolved back into madness. It was enough. The Titan smiled faintly. He could feel the pulse of the warp, infinite, self-devouring, alive. He whispered one word that had guided his existence across galaxies: balance. The word was anathema here. Reality spasmed. Rivers of molten thought reversed their flow. Entire legions of lesser demons disintegrated as the resonance of that concept tore through the world. In a place that had never known equilibrium, the idea of balance was a toxin. On the demon world of Pandrivax, the Chaos Legions noticed a tremor. Khorne's bloodthirsters sensed an intruder who did not bleed. Tzeentch's Lords of Change felt logic where there should be only flux. Nurgle's garden wilted as rot reversed its decay. Slaaneish's followers wept as their pleasures turned hollow. Someone was rewriting the rules. Thanos began to walk. Each step was measured, each motion deliberate. The land responded to his composure. The storms slowed, the screaming ceased. His mere presence forced the world to imitate calm. He realized the warp mirrored the mind, and that his mind, honed by endless calculation, could bend it. In the material universe, ships traveling through the warp found their Geller fields flickering. Navigators screamed and saw, for the briefest instant, a giant seated upon a throne of stillness, surrounded by collapsing stars. Many went blind. Others began chanting his name without knowing why. On Terra, deep within the Sanctum Imperialis, the Emperor's corpse flickered upon his golden throne. A single spark of psychic interference brushed the Astronomicon. Something vast, cold, and deliberate. The High Lords dismissed it as fluctuation. The Inquisition did not. Orders were dispatched to investigate psychic irregularities across the segmentum obscurus. But Thanos was not concerned with mortals. He stood before a lake of molten souls, a psychic ocean reflecting the faces of the damned. He reached down, and the lake froze. It was then that the first demon dared to approach him. A towering bloodthirster, wings molten iron, eyes like dying suns. Its name was Bekral, and it had slaughtered for 10,000 years in the name of corn. When it struck, the warp bent in excitement. Thanos met its charge with an open palm. There was no weapon, no gauntlet, no beam, only will. The air rippled, and the demon disintegrated into a red mist. No explosion followed, no roar of victory. Silence. That silence spread like an infection. For the first time in the warp's history, one world became still. Across the Imperium, the four gods turned their gaze. Korn snarled, sensing defiance. Zinch whispered, recognizing potential. Nurgle crooned, seeing inevitability. Slaanesh laughed, sensing perfection twisted into serenity. They debated whether to destroy him or watch. Thanos, aware of their attention, spoke into the void itself. His voice echoed across dimensions. "I do not seek your thrones," he said, "only your understanding." The warp rippled, amused. No one had ever spoken to the gods without trembling. But Thanos was not mortal. He had faced celestials, he had destroyed worlds, and now as he extended his will into the Imperium, he felt something respond. The warp itself recognizing a kindred structure. The more he observed, the more he comprehended. Every emotion in this realm, rage, lust, decay, deceit, was an aspect of imbalance. The gods were parasites feeding on asymmetry. To rule them, one must embody equilibrium itself. So he began to experiment. He drew lines of psychic energy across the sky, shaping them into sigils that pulsed in rhythm. The terrain obeyed. Demons nearby began to collapse into dust, unable to exist in harmony. The warp's texture fluctuated, as if unsure whether to obey or resist. From the Imperium, psykers burned out as visions of perfect stillness overwhelmed their minds. Ships were lost to the tides as the warp temporarily crystallized around them. The Adeptus Mechanicus recorded data beyond comprehension. Stable warp fields, an impossible phenomenon. Within his mind, Thanos began to construct a map. Each god, each domain, each emotion corresponded to a pattern. It was mathematics of madness, and he was its architect. He did not yet realize that the warp was watching him just as intently. In a cavern beyond time, the Chaos Gods gathered. For the first time since creation, they were unified, if only in curiosity. Khorne wanted blood, Tzeentch wanted knowledge, Nurgle wanted continuity, Slaanesh wanted sensation. They sent emissaries, hybrid demons of their combined essence, to confront the intruder. When they arrived, Thanos was already seated upon a floating throne of black light, the environment perfectly symmetrical around him. "You seek dominion," one emissary hissed, its voice blending 1,000 tones. Thanos regarded it with calm disdain. "No, I seek purpose." The demons attacked anyway. The warp howled. From the eye of the storm, Thanos unleashed raw thought. He did not wield fire or lightning. He imposed will. The laws of physics reasserted themselves in defiance of madness. Gravity returned, heat dissipated, form stabilized. For a fleeting moment, the warp obeyed order. Every demon screamed as their essence tore apart, unable to exist in structure. The gods themselves recoiled. Khorne raged and sent rivers of blood cascading through the void. Tzeentch attempted to twist probability against him, but Thanos adapted, absorbing their power into new equations of balance. Each assault taught him more about how the warp functioned as a living algorithm. By the time the storm ended, Pandravax was no longer a demon world. It was a planet of glass and quiet. The warp around it had solidified into a sea of mirror-like stillness. The first world of order inside the Imperium had been born. In the Imperium, Imperial ships detected an anomaly, a dead zone in the warp, perfectly navigable, completely devoid of demonic interference. They named it the Silent Veil. To Thanos, it was merely the beginning. He stood atop a crystalline spire, gazing into infinite horizons of screaming color. His reflection in the glass looked back at him, serene, monumental, almost divine. The warp was his new infinity gauntlet. Each emotion, each god, each world, a gem of its own. He would not snap his fingers. He would reshape eternity by understanding it. In the depths of the galaxy, Chaos Legion stirred. Imperial inquisitors whispered of a psychic anomaly that froze demons. The Eldar cried out in terror, sensing a change in the currents of fate. And somewhere in the void, a mechanical prayer rose from the Adeptus Mechanicus. Omnicia reborn. Thanos closed his eyes. The warp hummed like a living machine beneath his consciousness. He smiled. Then let there be balance. The Imperium obeyed. For a heartbeat, all creation held its breath. Silence did not exist within the warp. Even when nothing stirred, its seas screamed. Yet, in the wake of the Titan's arrival, the screams turned uncertain. Something foreign was shaping the Imperium itself, pressing back against eternity's chaos with thought made will. Thanos stood upon a plane of living flame, yet it did not consume him. His armor glowed faintly, polished by the blood of stars long dead. Around him, the warp churned, hues of madness folding into order, red oceans freezing into crystalline calm. Each heartbeat from his chest radiated a pulse that tamed the storm for leagues in every direction. He was learning. The warp obeyed strength, and strength was something he understood without peer. Through the tides, he began to feel its nature. It was not an energy source as he first imagined. It was the collective emotion of all sentient life, raw and unrefined. Rage burned into red rivers, despair into gray fog, desire into shimmering pink light. It was a sea made from the mind of existence itself. He studied it as one might study a living god, and like all gods he had encountered, he prepared to master it. The warp resisted. It twisted against every act of will, but Thanos persisted, applying the same relentless logic that had once bent galaxies to his command. Each emotion became a particle to be categorized, each tide a reaction to be calculated. Slowly, the maelstrom began to align with rhythm and pattern. The impossible took shape. It was then that the warp screamed, not in pain, but in fear. The Chaos Gods awoke to something they had never felt before: intrusion without devotion. Khorne, lord of rage and endless battle, sensed his blood tides still. Nurgle felt disease stall mid-blossom. Tzeentch perceived his infinite plans cease to flow. Slaanesh's songs of excess echoed without echo. The intruder was not prey nor rival. He was alien to the very concept of their existence. In the brass citadel, Khorne rose from his throne of skulls, rivers of boiling blood trembling at the movement of his clawed hand. "Something denies war," he thundered, his voice collapsing legions of demons into ash. "I smell the arrogance of a god who believes himself above wrath." Far across the immaterial expanse, in gardens of rot and delight, Nurgle chuckled, though unease dripped from every laugh. "A sterile thing walks our garden, my brothers. He brings order, and order is death to all that grows." Within shifting labyrinths of ever-turning spires, Tzeentch's countless eyes blinked at once. He is logic incarnate, predictable, absolute, a heresy against change itself. And in a palace woven from sin and sensation, Slaanesh whispered with 1,000 mouths, "How exquisite! A being that cannot be tempted, cannot be moved. I must taste such stillness." For the first time in eons, the four horrors agreed. Something had to be undone. Thanos felt their approach long before he saw them. The warp darkened, its hues collapsing into shadow and red flame. Armies of demons poured from the storm, armies vast enough to drown planets. They came not to test, but to obliterate. He stood unmoving. His hand rose, and with the thought, the tides shifted. The first wave, bloodletters screaming Khorne's name, met invisible resistance. Their blades froze mid-swing, their roars silenced as the air thickened into crystal. They shattered like glass statues. Then came Nurgle's children, swollen with decay, oozing contagion and despair. Thanos unleashed a pulse of violet energy. It spread in concentric waves, sterilizing rot, erasing pestilence. Their flesh turned to ash, their laughter to silence. But the warp was endless, and its gods did not tire. Each death only fed their essence. The ground itself began to bleed reality. Thanos felt the pressure mounting. Here, even victory was poison. He adapted. Instead of striking outward, he turned his power inward, drawing from the warp itself rather than resisting it. Every strike from a demon became fuel,
every hateful scream a conduit. The Imperium fed him as it did its native gods. He was learning their rules and rewriting them. The battlefield became a mirror of his mind. Chaos melted into form. The rivers flowed straight, the skies steadied. Lightning obeyed rhythm instead of madness. The warp's infinite horizon folded into a vast arena of equilibrium. For a moment, balance existed where only entropy had ever reigned. That moment enraged the gods. Khorne himself descended, a mountain of brass and fury. His axe could sunder dimensions, each swing a supernova of wrath. He met Thanos at the heart of the storm. When blade met fist, the warp screamed louder than any mortal ear could bear. Galaxies flickered out. The concept of battle itself trembled.
Khorne struck again and again, each blow an apocalypse. But Thanos endured. His will was absolute. He understood that the warp fed on emotion, and so he gave it none. No anger, no fear, only purpose. That was his weapon. And Khorne, the embodiment of rage, found himself weakening. His strength, drawn from endless conflict, faltered against a foe who refused to play the game. With one crushing punch, Thanos broke the axe of Khorne. Its shards dissolved into silence. The blood god roared and vanished into red mist, retreating into his own domain, wounded for the first time since time began. But victory carried consequences. The warp itself recoiled. By striking a god, Thanos had altered its core balance. The tides surged violently, birthing storms never before seen. From them rose new horrors, hybrid demons formed from broken concepts, creatures that should not exist. Thanos watched as a being with Tzeentch's eyes and Nurgle's flesh crawled from the storm, whispering paradoxes. He realized he was not cleansing the warp, he was mutating it. Still, he pressed forward. The second god came next. Tzeentch emerged from a spiral of time, every feather a prophecy. You are the impossible answer to every question. It hissed through 1,000 voices. But what is an answer worth if the question itself ceases to exist? Reality fractured. The warp's timelines inverted. Thanos found himself fighting infinite versions of his own choices, outcomes where he lost, where he died, where he surrendered. He saw himself kneeling before chaos, burning worlds, becoming a god of madness. But Thanos knew illusion. He had seen visions before, visions of triumph, despair, and cosmic futility. He broke through every one. He walked through the maze of time and found its heart. There, he crushed the symbol that anchored Tzeentch's realm, a fractal sphere of shifting futures, and absorbed its power. The warp shook. 2 gods had fallen before him. And then came the others. Nurgle's plague clouds blanketed the horizon, carrying the stench of rot and rebirth. He offered Thanos the peace of decay, the end of struggle through surrender. The Titan answered with silence, unleashing a pulse that annihilated disease itself. The gardens of rot withered into dust. Slaanesh descended next, a storm of color and sensation. The god's voice caressed reality, offering delight, release, the pleasure of victory eternal.
Thanos endured the temptation, as he endured all things. He crushed Slaanesha's illusions beneath a tide of indifference, erasing every note of the god's symphony. For the first time in eons, the warp was without rule. The four chaos gods lay diminished, their essence flickering like dying stars. Across the galaxy, warp storms ceased. Demons flickered out of existence. Astropaths cried in sudden silence. For a heartbeat in cosmic history, the Imperium was quiet. Thanos stood at its center, the sole constant in a realm built on flux. He raised his hand, and the warp obeyed. Mountains of emotion rose and fell in perfect symmetry. Stars of thought aligned in grids of impossible precision. He had done what none believed possible. He had brought order to the warp. But in doing so, he had created something new. The warp was never meant to be silent. Its chaos was its life. In its stillness, something monstrous began to gestate. A void where the four gods' essence mingled, fusing under pressure. Their hatred of Thanos, their pain, their fragmented power, it all coalesced into a single consciousness, one neither mortal nor divine. The warp screamed as this newborn entity stirred. It had no name, for it was all names. It was wrath, despair, deceit, and desire united. It was the recoil of a universe forced into calm. Thanos turned as the void split open. A form emerged, shifting, vast, the color of collapsed suns. Its voice was the echo of every demon, every nightmare, every broken dream. "We are the balance you seek, Titan," it whispered through 1,000 tongues, "and we will unmake you." The warp convulsed. The war within had only begun.
The warp's silence did not go unnoticed. Across the galaxy, void ships that had drifted blind for centuries suddenly found their way through the stars. Astropathic choirs screamed once and then sang in unison for the first time in 10,000 years. Navigator houses reported calm seas where there should have been madness. The Imperium called it a miracle. On Terra, the Astronomicon flared brighter than any mortal eye could bear. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica declared the light of the Emperor renewed, but their joy soon curdled into dread. For beneath that radiant beam, a second pulse flickered, cold, deliberate, violent. It was not the Emperor's will. Thanos' influence had begun to bleed into reality. Every man. Plagues ceased in underhives. Warp rifts sealed themselves. Machines long silent hummed to life. Even the Adeptus Mechanicus, ever skeptical of unquantified phenomena, began to detect patterns in the new psychic field. The omnisciized pulse, the rhythm of the machine god, now matched the strange new frequency emanating from the warp. The Magi named it the Constant. To them, it was proof that a universal logic existed beneath chaos. To the Inquisition, it was a contagion of thought. To the faithful, it was hope given form. And to Thanos, it was progress. Within the warp, he stood unmoving at the heart of his empire of stillness. The great tides obeyed him now. Thought and emotion no longer collided, they intertwined with purpose. From that serenity, he extended his consciousness outward. Each mind that felt calm, each soul that found order in despair became a node of his expanding network of will. The warp no longer raged against the Imperium, it began to synchronize with it. But balance, once enforced, cannot remain without sacrifice. Psykers across the Imperium began to die, quietly at first. Minds burned not by demonic possession, but by suffocation. Their connection to the warp found no chaos to feed upon. They starved for disorder. Their deaths were clean, bloodless, and absolute. The black ships filled with corpses before reaching Terra. The Scholastica Psychana declared it a paradox. The Inquisition called it a threat greater than chaos itself. Without the Imperium's flow, humanity's greatest weapon and its greatest curse would both perish. Still, on thousands of worlds, new cults arose. They called their deity the Equilibrium. Some believed it a new aspect of the Emperor, others a herald of final judgment. Their scriptures spoke not of faith, but of proportion, an end to extremes. Priests who preached zeal were replaced by those who preached calm. The Imperium, built on fanaticism, began to lose its fire. Inquisitor Alaric Dorn of the Ordo Hereticus was the first to see the pattern clearly. His reports described an invisible infection of reason spreading faster than any plague. The more the warp calmed, the more human minds turned toward serenity, losing passion, fear, even devotion. He named it the Stillness Heresy. The High Lords of Terra dismissed it as isolated psychosis, until the Adeptus Mechanicus sent their own message. Deep beneath Mars, a conclave of archmagi had detected a perfect harmonic resonance within the noosphere. It pulsed every 71 seconds, identical across all cogitators, all servitors, all machine spirits. It carried a message, not words, but a principle. Order without end. Many tech priests wept at its beauty. Others tore out their own augmentations in horror, for they recognized the pattern. It matched no known frequency in imperial design, but it bore the logic of divinity. The machine god was speaking in new code. The cult Mechanicus divided overnight. Half of Mars proclaimed the coming of the true Omnissiar, a being who united logic and will, machine and soul. The other half declared it heresy beyond measure. Civil war erupted beneath the planet's crust, forge against forge, data fire against blade. And as Mars burned, the signal pulsed on. Across the stars, the violet pulse became legend. Rogue traders spoke of ghost fleets that navigated the warp unassailed, their Geller fields shimmering in perfect geometry. Imperial Guard regiments reported psychic calm in the presence of the signal. Even the Astartes, those demigods of war, felt unease, for they could not hear the Emperor's voice anymore. On Baal, the Blood Angels found their black rage lessening, the curse that had haunted them for millennia dulled, but so did their fury, their drive, their passion for battle. They became efficient, mechanical, without fire. A chapter of angels turned statues in armor. On Macragge, the Ultramarines recorded a week of absolute psychic silence. Guilliman himself, reborn and burning with duty, sensed something he had never felt before: equilibrium without purpose. The balance of death. He called it the shadow of order, and it terrified him more than any daemon. Throughout all this, Thanos did not gloat, for there was no arrogance left in him. The warp obeyed, and the Imperium followed. He did not command as conqueror, he reshaped as craftsman. To him, it was the fulfillment of his philosophy, the universe without excess. Yet, deep within that perfection, something stirred. The entity born from the fusion of the fallen gods, the unbound chorus, was not destroyed. It watched, unseen, beneath the new calm. Every act of balance carved its prison deeper, yet fed its hunger. It grew in silence, feeding on the void between thoughts, the stillness between breaths. The warp itself began to fracture under paradox. For every moment of calm imposed upon it, an equal storm built beneath. The Imperium was never meant to sleep. Its dreams became nightmares too vast for containment. Thanos felt the tremors. His control wavered. Stars within the warp flickered. He knew the cost of victory. The very balance he enforced would collapse upon itself. But he had come too far. He turned his attention back to the Imperium, amplifying his signal, linking his consciousness to the minds of billions. If he could spread equilibrium fast enough, if all thought aligned at once, the resonance could become permanent. The warp and Imperium would merge into a single plane of existence. No chaos, no order, no division. Perfect stasis. The process began. On every world, psychic harmonics intensified. Dreams turned identical. Emotion dulled. Entire populations moved in sync, their behavior mathematically predictable. The galaxy itself began to hum with unity. And at the center of it all, on Terra, the Emperor stirred upon his golden throne. For the first time in millennia, his eyes opened, his light burned through the immaterial calm like a blade of gold through glass. He saw what had become of his realm, not in ruin, but in silence. Humanity without faith, a galaxy without chaos, a universe without choice. Thanos' vision had reached the throne world. The balance had touched the divine. The Astronomicon shattered. Its beam collapsed inward, twisting into a singular pulse of raw psychic reaction. The Emperor's will, still vast beyond comprehension, clashed with Thanos' equilibrium. For a heartbeat in eternity, the warp and the Imperium aligned perfectly. Then everything broke.
The resonance collapsed. Half the psykers in the Imperium died instantly, their souls bursting like suns. The other half went blind, their minds burnt by the clash of two absolute wills. Warp storms reignited across the galaxy, but not as before. They formed spirals, geometric imperfection, storm fronts of balance and chaos intertwined. Thanos staggered within his domain. The warp buckled beneath him. The unbound chorus laughed with thousand mouths. The equilibrium cracked. On 1,000 worlds, the cults of equilibrium saw their god flicker, their calm shatter into panic. The Mechanicus's divine signal went silent, leaving only static. Mars's forges froze. And from the remnants of broken faith, the warp began to awaken anew. Thanos had shown the galaxy the face of perfect balance, and in doing so, reminded it that existence itself could not endure stillness. The Imperium now knew two gods, not one. The golden throne still burned, but beside its light, shadows of violet danced in defiance. The Titan's dream had crossed the veil, and now both realms were forever changed.
The warp convulsed. Where once its tides flowed with mindless hunger, now they shuddered in patterns. The immaterium, that storm of thought and nightmare, began to sense limits. Logic, once alien to its essence, spread like infection through the madness. At the center of it all stood Thanos, the mad Titan, his form no longer bound by physical matter, but shaped from the very thoughts of reality itself. Each gesture altered the psychic ocean, each thought redrew the spectrum of despair and ecstasy. Entire daemon worlds inverted upon themselves, their skies bleeding order. Screaming hosts of Khorne's legions found their rage suddenly hollow, as if the concept of wrath itself faltered beneath the weight of Thanos' purpose. The blood god, sensing his realm constrict, howled from his brass citadel, the roar shaking the foundations of unreality. He saw, across endless plains, the violet giant walking through the storms of the warp, unafraid. His footsteps crushed rivers of souls into silence. His eyes burned with that calm, calculating certainty that no god, no daemon had ever possessed within this sea of chaos. And the warp trembled. It began as defiance. Khorne unleashed his legions, 1 billion daemon warriors roaring across the immaterial frontiers, axes raised against an enemy who stood alone. But Thanos did not fight with steel or fury. He raised his hand, and the rivers of blood froze mid-flow. He opened his palm, and the meaning of violence collapsed into stillness. The slaughter stopped, not by death, but by disbelief. For the first time in eternity, rage lost its purpose. Khorne's roar became silence. He felt something he had never known, the absence of conflict. It burned him more deeply than defeat. From the plague gardens, Nurgle watched the unraveling. His laughter, always slow and amused, fell into an uneasy rumble. The Titan was reordering the great game. The cycle of death and rebirth that had fed him for eons began to lose potency. Decay without renewal, rot without vitality, meaningless. The grandfather of plagues reached into the mists of his domain, birthing new contagions of despair to strike this invader. But when his pestilence reached the Titan, it turned to ash. Thanos' will burned away corruption without heat or light, pure negation. The warp's living infections died in thought alone. From her palace of mirrors, Slaanesh watched in fascination. Pleasure and agony, her twin thrones of indulgence, flickered with doubt. The Titan did not fight, did not yield, did not crave. There was no lust within him, no hedonism, no self-delusion. He existed with absolute purpose, and that made him horrifying. She reached for his mind, whispering through the fractured souls of fallen mortals, promising sensation beyond infinity. He heard her, he understood, and he denied. To a being who had felt the weight of universes die for ambition, there was nothing she could offer. Her whispers became screams. Tzeentch, the architect of fate, alone remained confident. He watched from the etheric heights, the Titan's every move feeding new threads of destiny into his labyrinth. No creature can impose order upon chaos. All becomes fuel for change. Yet when he peered through his crystal visions, every possible future bent toward one horizon, a warp bound by intellect, sculpted by the hand of balance. It was not change, it was conclusion. And for the first time, the Lord of Change hesitated. Thanos did not speak. He did not gloat. His every act was calculation made manifest. The Chaos Gods were no longer his adversaries. They were obstacles in the equation of existence. His mind stretched across the psychic sea, quantifying emotions, rewriting the rules of thought.
Where once the warp had been a tempest of uncontrolled feeling, now it became a living geometry of will. Shapes of belief formed and shattered like crystal reefs. Daemons found themselves obeying unseen patterns, compelled to hierarchy, to structure. The more they resisted, the more the fabric of the warp itself betrayed them. He had found its law. The Imperium, he realized, was the universe's reflection. Every thought, every fear, every dream given substance. It was not chaos for its own sake, but chaos born of consciousness. Control the minds that feed it, and one could control the warp itself. So Thanos reached through the barrier between realities. His influence seeped into the Imperium, entering the dreams of mortals, the meditations of psykers, the rituals of priests. Each mortal act of faith or fear became a thread in his tapestry. The four gods felt it instantly, their food being stolen, their worship redirected. Across the galaxy, psykers fell to their knees, trembling under visions of a vast hand reaching across the void. Planets screamed. Inquisitors burned entire sectors trying to purge his growing cults, but still the visions spread. A single symbol appeared in the minds of trillions, a balanced scale, half shadow, half light. It was the emblem of a new god. Thanos did not ask for worship, yet it came unbidden, drawn by instinct. To mortals sick of endless war, his voice in their dreams promised equilibrium. To zealots, it promised punishment for excess. To the Mechanicus, it spoke as data and logic, the ultimate equation of cosmic truth. Each act of belief strengthened his grasp upon the warp. The gods raged, but their domains were cracking. The warp's endless madness thinned. Entire daemon worlds vanished into vacuum. Warp storms stabilized, becoming spheres of absolute symmetry. But balance demanded sacrifice. The more Thanos imposed order, the more the warp resisted. The suppressed emotions, hate, lust, decay, ambition, built pressure beyond containment. Each god retreated, gathering essence for a final retaliation. Their war against the Titan had failed individually. Together, they would become something new. From the uncountable depths, their combined essence began to fuse. Khorne's fury, Nurgle's endurance, Slaanesh's desire, and Tzeentch's deceit, four antithetical energies merging into one impossible singularity. The warp twisted into a storm of colors beyond reason. Reality and unreality folded into one another. The result was abomination. The unbound chorus was born, not a being, but a choir of all contradiction, its presence unmade meaning. Its voice was the sum of every scream ever uttered. Where it moved, truth and lie ceased to differ. Where it looked, existence forgot its purpose. Even the gods that birthed it no longer existed apart. They were its notes, its pulse, its madness. Thanos faced the storm. He had tamed the warp's tides, conquered gods, reshaped dimensions, yet this thing was beyond will. It was entropy incarnate, the warp's immune response to logic. The Titan's eyes burned brighter. He stepped forward, each movement dragging constellations of psychic energy around him. The unbound chorus descended, filling eternity with its cacophony, and the universe shook. Where they met, the warp screamed. Entire sectors of real space blinked out as the psychic clash tore through the veil. Planets became ghost worlds, their populations turned to thought alone. Imperial navigators lost their bearings as the Astronomicon's light flickered beneath the storm. The Inquisition declared a second great rift, though no warp storm had ever behaved like this before. Cold, mathematical, rhythmic. The battle was not fought in space or time, it was fought in concept. The unbound chorus devoured everything it touched, every idea, every emotion, every contradiction, becoming more real with each consumption. Thanos met it blow for blow, his will an anchor in the sea of meaning. He bent fragments of the warp into crystalline weapons, shaped from distilled logic. Each strike erased 1,000 lies, yet for each truth revealed, another was born. Balance demanded opposition. And so the Titan understood he could never destroy it. To kill chaos entirely would be to end thought itself. He could only contain it, and even that would require sacrifice. The warp boiled, fractal storms tearing apart ancient daemon realms. Mortals across the galaxy dreamed of the conflict without understanding, their nightmares fueling both combatants. As eternity burned, Thanos looked upon his creation. A near-stable warp, a universe trembling on the edge of clarity, and realized the cost of perfection. Even gods can be devoured by purpose.
The galaxy shivered. Stars bent under the weight of psychic resonance. Entire sectors trembled with the aftermath of the Titan's confrontation with the unbound chorus. No demon, no god, no mortal had ever felt the universe hold its breath for so long. The very fabric of reality quivered in anticipation of a final reckoning. Thanos, standing at the center of the warp, surveyed the aftermath of his designs. The Imperium, though scarred, had stabilized into an impossible lattice of order and chaos, bound together by sheer force of will. The unbound chorus, fractured yet contained, seethed like a coiled storm behind the Titan's psychic barrier. Every fragment of its power pulsed with raw, unbridled contradiction, threatening to tear through the constructed equilibrium with every heartbeat of the universe. He understood what was required. To sustain balance across the galaxy, he could not remain purely a mortal or even a godlike entity. He would become an immovable axis, the anchor upon which reality itself would turn. He would integrate with the warp, binding his essence to its currents, becoming simultaneously part and controller, observer and enforcer. It was the ultimate synthesis, the fusion of thought and will, of the immaterium and the materium, of purpose and freedom. Across real space, the consequences were immediate and devastating. On Terra, the Emperor's throne burned brighter than ever before.
Yet the Golden Throne's psychic light now intertwined with the violet pulse of the Titan. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Emperor and another power shared dominion over the minds of humanity. Even he could not fully predict the consequences. The Adeptus Custodes whispered of prophecy and catastrophe, while the High Lords debated strategies that no mortal mind could comprehend. Hive worlds shifted in synchronization, populations moving in patterns too precise to be random. The Imperial Guard, whose numbers once represented the endless variability of humanity, marched in perfect, almost inhuman unison. Entire regiments executed orders simultaneously across thousands of planets. Morale, fear, courage, and fanaticism harmonized into a singular resonance that was both terrifying and inspiring. Even the Space Marines, chapters that had fought across millennia with independence, found themselves subtly influenced. Tactical genius no longer emerged from tradition or intuition, but from the subtle tug of equilibrium that Thanos radiated. The Ultramarines, Blood Angels, and Space Wolves alike felt the whisper of his will in their actions, their impulses bending toward a calculated universal efficiency. Yet not all welcomed this new order. Chaos forces, though weakened, began to adapt. The unbound chorus, though contained, continuously tested the limits of its prison. Fragments of demon essence seeped into unguarded systems, corrupting, mutating, and challenging Thanos' lattice. Khorne's residual rage ignited entire battle zones, though the violence was now constrained in narrow, predictable patterns. Nurgle's plagues persisted, yet they now spread in perfect symmetry, more aesthetic than destructive. Slanesh's whispers still infiltrated mortal dreams, but the resonance limited indulgence to a controlled measure. Tzeentch's schemes bent toward inevitability, unable to introduce genuine unpredictability into the lattice. The Chaos Gods had become, paradoxically, both present and impotent, a testament to the Titan's mastery. Their power remained immense, yet it had been rendered mathematically subordinate to a higher will. Xenos factions watched with a mixture of fear, curiosity, and opportunism. Eldar seers predicted cataclysmic shifts in the webway, sensing Thanos' lattice might stabilize certain paths while closing others forever. The Orcs, unrestrained and violent, attempted to exploit minor cracks, but found their madness curbed in ways that defied logic. Even the Tyranids, attuned to consumption and adaptation, hesitated at the borders of controlled sectors, their instinct to devour momentarily stymied by the unnatural order. The galaxy, in short, had become a single organism, with Thanos as both brain and spine.
But perfect balance requires sacrifice. The Titan's fusion with the warp demanded constant attention. Portions of his consciousness became indistinguishable from the currents he commanded. He was everywhere and nowhere, visible only as ripples of violet light across psychic space. Individual thought became a conduit for his will, and every act of creation or destruction required meticulous calibration. Mortals who attempted to interact directly with him found themselves overwhelmed by the scope of his perception. Psykers of exceptional skill who tried to harness his lattice were absorbed into the structure, their consciousness preserved but subsumed, becoming nodes in the network of equilibrium. The warp's tides themselves no longer ebbed and flowed freely. Everything moved in perfect synchrony, guided by Thanos's omnipresent mind. In this new paradigm, morality itself became a function of balance. Acts that would have been condemned as heretical or celebrated as heroic were now judged by their contribution to the universal lattice. War, once a chaotic instrument of power, became a precise calculation. Rebellion, once spontaneous, became predictable and thus manageable. Even the act of faith, so central to human existence, was subtly realigned to fit the new equilibrium. The galaxy was no longer free, yet it had never been more efficient. There were consequences even Thanos could not entirely predict. On distant worlds, pockets of resistance erupted where equilibrium was weakest. Rogue psykers, lost navigators, and rogue traders formed unpredictable coalitions, exploiting the tiny imperfections in the lattice. These groups became living anomalies, unpredictable variables that resisted assimilation. In some sectors, entire systems refused to align, producing local warp storms and minor outbreaks of chaos. Yet even in resistance they were diminished. Their victories were fleeting, their plans anticipated by the lattice itself. Thanos observed them with clinical detachment, allowing small rebellions to persist, not as threats, but as minor calibrations, ensuring the system did not collapse under perfect symmetry. In essence, he had become both God and gardener. The final test of balance came when the unbound chorus attempted one last desperate surge. It concentrated its essence into a single, titanic manifestation, a storm of contradictions intended to unravel everything Thanos had built. The clash of wills reshaped reality itself. Stars winked out, warp currents roiled in fractal chaos. Entire fleets and planetary systems were caught between two opposing conceptual forces. Yet, Thanos's lattice held. He absorbed the chorus's fury, integrating its contradictions into the structure. Each contradiction became a calculated vector within his design, neutralized not through destruction, but through assimilation. The unbound chorus ceased to exist as an independent entity. Its essence was preserved, encoded into the very currents of the warp. A memory of chaos now constrained by order. The galaxy exhaled. Where once the universe teetered on the brink of annihilation, it now pulsed with structured vitality. Death, war, and madness persisted, but in constrained, comprehensible forms. Balance had been achieved, not through elimination, but through the imposition of perfect structure. And yet, Thanos did not rest. He remained vigilant, his consciousness spread across the lattice, a permanent sentinel of the galaxy's equilibrium. Mortals worshipped him, feared him, or studied him, but none could challenge his dominion. Even the Emperor, seated upon his golden throne, recognized the scope of this new reality. A universe co-ruled by an alien mind that had mastered the warp in a way no human could comprehend. History would remember him as a god, a tyrant, a savior, and a destroyer, all at once. The Imperium adapted, chaos adapted, Xenos adapted, the galaxy endured. But the shadow of the Titan's presence remained eternal. Every act, every thought, every warp pulse was now subject to his will. Balance had been imposed, absolute, inescapable, irreversible.
and across the stars, violet light pulsed like a heartbeat. The universe had been tamed, the gods had been contained, and Thanos had become both ruler and guardian of reality itself, the devourer of gods, the keeper of equilibrium, the ultimate arbiter of the 41st millennium. In the stillness that followed, one truth remained. Perfection is a burden, and balance is its own eternal war.